weather is cooling down. The days are getting shorter. It's a pleasant time of year in the shop. And this is one of my favorite parts of making instruments. There's something intrinsically satisfying about this process. I find the flat light and crisp air this time of year very soothing. The colder weather allows me to work longer in the shop. It's time to get out the foil and put on a set of ribs. Who doesn't like ribs? There's been a lot of CNC work up to this point. Not that there won't be any in this video, but not very much. Just a little seasoning to make everything come together nicely. This process is fraught with inaccuracy. I'm attempting to make this process, intrinsically inaccurate as it is, as precise as possible. I find that folks tend to make the practice of bending ribs more complicated than necessary. There's a lot of overpriced tools out there for mechanizing this process. I find that it's easy enough to allow this process to self-regulate. You're not going to be successful if you try to bend a 2x4 to 90 degrees. The stock material has to be relatively thin to make extreme bends. If you've ever tried to bend sides over an iron, you've probably realized that you need to have several things happen at the same time to be successful. If I explain it correctly, it'll be impossible to reproduce. The first is heat, and quite a bit of heat. Not enough to burn the wood, but very close to it. And the second is steam. Not water, but steam. You often see people using a damp cloth over the iron and bending the wood across it. Logically, steam would be more useful inside the wood, so a soaked piece of wood would be the best. This is not true. Saturated wood becomes very brittle and will split and break easily. The key is to lightly apply moisture just before the heat is applied, and just enough that the heat will boil off any remaining water. This balance must be found empirically, by experimentation and through experience. I have found that if I spray water onto the part just before I bend it, and wrap it in foil to hold the steam close to the piece, it bends easily. It's still important to try not to bend before the part is hot enough. I make this mistake quite frequently. Anything can be a hammer, and there's usually a more substantial hammer within reach. The temperature controller I use is very sophisticated. I plug in the heat blanket, and when I can see, smell, and feel that it's ready to bend, I slowly bend it into the form. Once the part is bent, I unplug the heating blanket. I usually let the part cool and then cycle the heat a couple of times to make sure that I've driven off any remaining moisture. This also helps to set the bend. It's always a good idea to try this for the first time with the most expensive, perfectly matched set you can afford. I decided to go with an inside mold for this project. It's not traditional for guitar making. Most guitar makers use outside molds. One of the difficult things for guitar-shaped ribs is holding the center bouts into the proper position. I like the way inside molds keep the blocks in a predefined orientation and at the same time keep the center bouts in place. With outside molds, you clamp the blocks into the ribs. This can introduce alignment issues. External molds require larger stock pieces. Even when the pieces are nested, they use more material. I kept this mold as simple as possible. It's intended for a single use. It's not necessary to construct it with a great deal of detail. I also used a new-to-me technique with the sides of this instrument. I thicknessed the sides into two parts. I bent these two parts at the same time and glued them together in the side bending jig. On the cutaway side of the guitar, I thickness sanded the two-part lamination slightly thinner. This makes the tight cutaway bend much more manageable. I shape the linings in the same jig. Remember, never start over, never quit, make the work an absolute misery. Then you're there. Hang on to that feeling. That's what it's all about. I hope to show that technology can make complex processes more reliable. If you don't pay attention, you're not going to be able to leverage these advantages. I love to utilize technology. This in no way detracts from the hands-on aspects of this work. And I don't think it ever will. Simply put, some tasks must be by hand. Some are more appropriately implemented with automation. I embrace them both and accumulate the benefits. The satisfaction of removing the ribs from the mold once the linings are glued in is immense. These structures are very delicate at this point, and it's hard to think about their ability to withstand string tension. With the top glued in, the structure becomes much more resilient. After installing the bracing in the back, this delicate structure will all tie together into a sturdy box. Feel free to call it a CNC-made guitar. It is, and I'm proud of it. In many ways, it's more complicated than traditional methods. Yes, I agonize over small details and develop non-traditional methods to solve typical problems. In the end, it's more about making something, anything, than it is about making something perfect. We strive for perfection not in an attempt to achieve it, but rather for the enjoyment of the process. It's more important to concentrate on what you've done than the mistakes you've made. What you learn from these mistakes is far more valuable than any criticism you receive. We are all our own greatest critics. Greatness is not perfection on the first attempt. It takes thousands of attempts to approximate greatness. I hope you will make this attempt today. And while you make this attempt, remember, there is an artistry in everything. Take the time to see and enjoy it. This guitar is starting to take shape, and I hope you stick around for the next episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.